Good morning, everyone. My name is Cindy Stewart, and I am one of your trainers this morning. I am accompanied by my cohort, Lynn Brown. He'll be joining in on the presentation as we go forward a little bit. We're talking about crisis proofing your nonprofit. It is a disaster preparedness organization, part of the UWASI series, which is who our funders are. So let's just jump right into it. Again, my name is Cindy Stewart. I am a retired emergency manager from Santa Clara County. I retired in 2018 and moved immediately to Vancouver, Washington, which is where I am today. The weather is beautiful. Vancouver wishes you a great day and hopes that your weather is equally as nice. We've got about 72 degrees and bright sunshine today. As an emergency manager, I participated frequently in assisting nonprofits in their efforts to become more prepared for disaster and the cadre, the whole cadre concept. At this point, I'd like to introduce my co-lead, Lynn Brown, if you would like to just give us a little bit about.
Sure. Good morning. Hi, my name is Lynn Brown. Like Cindy, I'm a retired emergency manager. I was emergency manager for the city of Sunnyvale and then retired as the emergency manager for the city of Mountain View. So again, like Cindy, about 30 years of experience, spent a lot of time with different groups, neighborhood organizations, regular citizens, city employees. So a lot of time spent trying to get people ready. So that's what we're going to try to do today, is talk about how you can get your organization better prepared to deal with bad things that might happen.
Yeah, thank you, Lynn. I want to talk just briefly about cadre. Some of you may already know who cadre is. This may be some of your first time participating in a cadre training, but in essence, basically, we are a group of passionate emergency managers that are really focused on helping nonprofits in a disaster. Cadre has been around for a long time. We actually, the cadre concept came out of Loma Prieta earthquake in 1989. So for 35 years, we've been kind of doing this, but we did not become a nonprofit until about 3 months before COVID hit in 2019. That's a tough time to start a brand new nonprofit, as you can imagine. Shortly after that, the Board of Supervisors for Santa Clara County deemed us the VOAD, which is Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster. And that actually is just an arm of who cadre is. It gives us the ability to tap into a larger national network for long-term recovery. But our mission primarily is to bridge that gap between vital non-governmental resources and communities in crisis. So on Blue Sky Days, we do trainings like this. We assist CBOs, FBOs, private sector in their efforts to become more resilient to the next disaster. And we coordinate support networks, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go forward as well. I did notice that one of our other partners is on the call, Luna Muhammad, and she's working feverishly on some of those support networks. So maybe when we get to the end, I can get her to talk a little bit about that.
Something I used to tell people about cadre was kind of one call does it all. Instead of calling 14, 15, 100 different agencies, you can deal with cadre, and we deal with most of those agencies. So it's a great way to get everybody kind of working together.
Yeah, and as we talk a little bit more about networks, we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. One of the initiatives that cadre was funded for a couple of years ago was the MyShake app. I don't know if you've heard about that, but you can download an app on your phone that will potentially give you a few seconds to 30 seconds maybe prior to an earthquake. Might not be a lot of time, but if I was standing on a ladder, it wouldn't take me 10 seconds to get down. I could get under a table quickly, or get away from a window. So I would encourage you to either go to the App Store or to Google Play or wherever you get your apps and download the MyShake app. For this session, our objectives for today are to identify some potential risks, to talk through some of the aspects of crisis management planning, and to discuss some of the strategies for building partnerships and networks. This is not a continuity of operations planning class. We do have one of those, and in fact, we have one coming up in the next few months. Continuity of operations planning is a little more intricate, a little more detailed, and focuses on a couple of other areas in addition to what we're going to talk about today. I would not call this necessarily continuity of operations planning light, but I would say that you probably don't need a crisis management plan and a COOP plan. That might be a little bit of overkill. So decide for yourself which one is appropriate for you. We're going to start off by talking about some of the impacts of a disaster on a nonprofit organization. FEMA did a report last year and said that about 25% of businesses do not reopen after a disaster. Our goal here at Cadre is to make sure that your nonprofit is not one of those, that you are one of the 75% that can reopen and that does reopen, and that in fact stays open. That would be the optimal option, right? So some of the things that can be impacted, you know, your operations may be impacted, may be disrupted. You may find that there's some financial strain to recover, to rebuild, to resupply, those kind of things. Your service delivery may be challenged in one way or another. Something that you might not even think about, but your standing in the community, where you stand in the community may be affected by the disaster. If you can't open your doors, then you know, you might not be a dependable enough agency to be funded by a grant or whatever. Long-term recovery and resilience are also some of the things that might be impacted by disaster. I'm trying to let new people in while I'm moving my slides. So let's talk a little bit about operational disruptions. Oh, wait, before I do this, let me go back here. And I just want to tell you that we have a little nonprofit, kind of an example nonprofit called River Care. And we're going to walk River Care through this process. So I just want to start off by giving you a little bit of background about this little nonprofit called River Care. Let's consider this nonprofit called River Care, which focuses on environmental conservation and community education about river ecosystems. River Care operates out of a small office near a riverbank and runs several community programs, including river cleanup events, educational workshops, and after-school programs for local children. Pre-disaster, the situation is this. River Care is well regarded in the community with a stable base of donors and volunteers. The organization has a small annual budget and relies on a mix of grants, individual donations, and fundraising events to cover its expenses. Then the flood happens. A severe storm causes the river to overflow, leading to extensive flooding in the area. River Care's office is inundated with water, and the surrounding community is significantly affected. Okay, so as we go through this training, this workshop, I want to kind of refer back to River Care and to this little nonprofit to kind of look through some of the issues that they might be facing. And I'd like for you to help me with that. I'd like for you to kind of step in and tell me what could have, how could this impact River Care and this little organization. Okay, so operational disruptions might be one of the things that might be impacted by a disaster. Your facility could be damaged. Your offices could be damaged. Access to your offices could be damaged. And it doesn't matter what the disaster is. It could be a small disaster. It could be a heat event that causes high temperatures and you've lost power for a few days in your office. Anything that impacts your ability to do your job as an organization in the way that you do it today is considered a disaster. It could be small, it could be large. You might have some loss of equipment or supplies. In the case of River Care, they may have, their basement may have flooded and they may have lost their supplies, their office supplies, or they may have a situation where they have some cleanup equipment or that sort of thing that got ruined from the flooding. There could be some volunteer or staff inability to participate. If you're affected by a disaster as a nonprofit, your staff and your volunteers are potentially affected as well. So what kind of things do you think that River Care might have happening as it pertains to operational disruptions in a disaster? Anybody have anything to input here?
Kind of ironic for a river place to be right by the river.
Yeah, I know. I thought that too.
Because that's one of the things right off the bat, as we talk about, and Cindy will talk about this in a minute, is looking at what could go wrong. What are you near? What could possibly go wrong at your location? And being near a river, that gives you a good chance of flooding right off the bat.
Sure. Okay, well, let's talk about a little bit about the financial strains of a disaster and how that might impact your abilities after a disaster or during a disaster. There could be increased costs. Your building could be damaged. You may need to replace your supplies, your equipment, your computers, those kind of things. Your donations may be decreased. Your funders may be using donations in other areas as the disaster unfolds and recovery begins to happen. Donations may decrease, but the other side of the coin is donations may increase if you're doing things that if your day-to-day operation is directly affecting the community and you're resilient and able to make it through the disaster and continue to provide those services to the community, you may find that funding is more abundant after a disaster. And that may not always be the greatest. It may cause its own set of strains, financial strains. You may find that all of a sudden you've got funding reporting that you didn't have to do before. Certainly your funding could be uncertain. That funding could go in other directions depending on what the disaster is and what the funders want to, how they want to diversify those funds. So your service delivery challenges could look like this. You may find that if you're doing direct service to the community, say, for example, you're a food bank or you provide some other service directly to the community in some way, you may find after the disaster that there's more need. Even with COVID, we found that there was more need for food delivery and those kind of things. So you may find that that there's an increase in demand after a disaster. You may also find that your programs are disrupted. So things that you typically would do on a day-to-day basis, you may not do, and you may be doing something completely different, or you may be focused on just one program or two programs rather than the plethora of programs that you provide for your clients at this time. Your clients will be affected by the disaster as well, potentially. And they, having access to them and them having access to your facility could be disrupted. Transportation could be an issue. Getting to them, they may be displaced. They may not be in the same place that they were for their daily services. They may be in a shelter now. You may need to help them in other ways. So those are challenges that you might need to take into consideration. And as we look at RiverCare and how RiverCare has service delivery challenges, we might take a look at some of their challenges. What kind of challenges do you think RiverCare may have in this situation? This is where we do the interactive part, folks. So we interact with me, please.
Somebody out there. Something that, as Cindy mentioned, it was something to think about is just transportation. It could be, obviously traffic can be disrupted because of problems with the street and road systems. Public transportation could have issues. For instance, there could be a possibility if there's evacuations are needed, buses may be diverted to do evacuations as opposed to running the regular route. Or in an earthquake situation, you have damage to light rail. Just the streets may be damaged. So you may have a hard time just getting people back and forth and trying to get out to provide any of your service, or people coming in take advantage of your services as well.
And the roads may be in perfect condition, but the government may have closed them down to make them, because there are roads that are vital arteries through the city to provide emergency supplies. And so those roads will be impacted by the disaster. Even if the road itself is in good condition, you may not be able to get through with providing your services, because government may be needing that artery.
Although in this scenario, it's actually, RiverCare doesn't have to go to the river because the river came to RiverCare. It's right there in the building with them. So
yes, but RiverCare's after school activities will be impacted. They won't be able to do those because their kids probably aren't even in school anymore, or if they are, they may need to take that program to the school rather than allowing the kids to come to the facility.
And there could be damage to ongoing, if they have projects and experiments and things they're working on.
Sure.
Could be damage to that could impact them down the line too.
Sure. That's certainly going to increase their ability to, increase their cleanup efforts. After this disaster is over, RiverCare is going to need a lot more volunteers to help them with their cleanup efforts and their environmental monitoring efforts. That's going to decrease during the disaster, but during the recovery process, they're going to need a lot more help. Certainly. So reputation and community relationships. This is kind of an interesting one, but and I alluded to it a little bit before. Your reputation may be at risk, and I think taking a look at RiverCare as an example, if RiverCare closed their doors because their building was affected by this flood and they didn't open again, and they didn't open again for 3 months, and there was radio silence, no one heard from RiverCare for 3 months. As a volunteer, even as a previous volunteer with RiverCare, you may not go back and help them more. We don't know what their situation is. They haven't communicated. They may not be available, or they may, and we just don't know. So your reputation and your ability to be a stable, viable organization after a disaster could be impacted by how well you rode the wave, whatever the disaster was, how well you made it through that disaster, and how resilient you actually were. If you're an agency that is well prepared and that has a plan in place and is able to actually use that plan to make it through the situation, and you come out strong on the other end, you might find that this is a really good thing for you. It's strengthened your relationships with your funders, with your volunteers, with other donors, because you've been a good, strong member of the community during this disaster. It may be a good positive thing for you as well. Long-term recovery and resilience. I don't guess everyone talks about long-term recovery and resilience. We certainly do in our office, because that's the business that we're in. But when it comes to long-term recovery, that being able to focus on what is the new normal? What does normal look like now? Because it's not going to be the same necessarily. Your priorities might change. You may have to adjust your strategy, or you may have to actually rewrite your strategic plan even.
Yeah. Let me jump in there too, Cindy, and talk about. So you've really got two things working. You got preparedness, getting ready for what happens in the moment. We were talking about river, the river gang, the river folks, river care. And so obviously if they were near a river, they could think about flooding and what could they do to prevent flooding in their area. Then once it's flooded, how do you recover from that? And that's where you get into long-term recovery. So it's dealing with the situation just as it happens and looking down the road. Where am I going to be in a month? What about 6 months? What about a year from now? How are we going to change? How are we going to deal with that? And as Cindy mentioned, strategic adjustment, you may have to change the plans and the strategy of your organization. You may have things that you day to day that you just can't do right then. You may have to put that off and get back to building your organization so you can provide the services down the line. That's one type of that. Another thing is your capacity. What are the things you can do? So the more you can invest in preparedness before an event, the more that's going to help you recover from it after the event. The more you can get your folks trained, the more resources you have on hand, the better off you're going to be when something actually does happen. And you hear the word resilience a lot, and you need to be resilient. You can just do things day to day and not think about the future. But when something bad does happen, you have to be ready for it. So you have to kind of look ahead and always be thinking, what could go wrong and how am I going to recover from that? And again, it could be funding, it could be training, it could be a lot of different things, but you really need to think about that and put it in the long-term view and think about down the road. Where are we going to go down the road after this happens?
And it's not always an expensive adventure either. Lynn alluded to, it could be training. It could be something very simple, like making sure that all your staff know where to communicate, where to get information from you when the disaster hits. Making sure that your clients know how they're going to get information from you, or how they're going to get services, or what they should expect from you when the disaster hits. That kind of planning takes $0. And I always, when I talk to people about preparing for disasters, I always hear things like, well, it's really expensive and we've got other priorities for our funding, but it isn't really expensive. The majority of it is thinking this thing through. Sit down at your staff meeting and, take 15 minutes and go, okay, the disaster of the day is, and here's what we're going to do about it. And let's talk about how we're going to recover from it. And let's write that down. And now we've got a plan, and it's as simple as that. It can be as simple as that.
And that's the key word. A lot of that comes back to planning. Do you have a plan? Does your organization have an emergency plan? What are we going to do in case of an earthquake? I mean, an all hazard plan, not just a fire, not just a flood or earthquake. What about everything? And does everyone know that plan? And have you practiced that plan? We'll talk more about this down the line. But a lot of the stuff just works, it starts by thinking about it and having something in place before you start, before something does go wrong. Oh my gosh, who would ever think that would happen? Having that plan. We all live in an earthquake prone area. We could be subject to flooding. Look around your area and see what could go wrong and how do you prepare for that.
Okay, so those are some of the things that may impact your organization. in a disaster. Can you think of other things? Are there other things that we haven't brought up? I think we need to do these sessions a little later. I don't.
Yeah, I think we're starting too early. Everybody
Okay,
hasn't had their coffee yet.
drink your coffee and then participate when we get to the second part, okay? All right, here we go. We're gonna talk now about what do we do about that stuff? How do we recover from that stuff? How do we mitigate that stuff? Denise says, personal
fine.
family issues with the emergency at hand. What do you mean by that? Dennis?
Denise?
Denise? Denise? You want to come up? Someone may have been impacted. Yeah, so your family, sure. Personal and low on staff, personally and low on staff. Sure, your family may be impacted. Your family may be impacted. Your staff's family may be impacted. Your clients may be impacted. And many of them will be impacted in various ways, depending on their own day-to-day vulnerabilities. You know, their ability, you know, I mean, if a family is impacted by a disaster and they can't go to work because of it, if their house is no longer standing or it's affected and they can't live there anymore, they maybe leave the area and go live with their in-laws for a while or that sort of thing, you may find that the disaster creates a disaster in that you now have to figure out how to get things done without the staff that you typically depend on day to day. So we'll talk a little bit about that in the recovery, in the mitigation section of this training, about making sure that you've got cross training happening.
Yeah. And if you think about it, it's kind of like you throw a pebble into a pond and it makes a ripple, and a ripple eventually covers the entire pond. So when things don't happen in a vacuum. So when there is that disaster, whether it's earthquake, fire, flood, whatever, you're right, it's going to affect everybody individually. So it's important. All your staff needs to be personally prepared as well. Have they done the things at home to prepare their house for an earthquake or a fire or a flood? And then it just ripples. The better prepared they are, the sooner they can get back to work, and then you can provide services again to your customers and your clients. But we're all in it together. Yeah, this is the thing. It doesn't affect one person; it affects everybody.
That's true. Okay, Lynn, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that we can do to make this a better situation. Now that we've talked a little bit about the impacts, I'm going to turn it over to you at this point to talk about the risk assessment.
Yeah. So really, a crisis management plan. How are you going to do that? The first thing, as I mentioned a couple times, is risk assessment. That's your big thing. What can go wrong? What is my risk? So think about what makes a crisis for your nonprofit or your community-based organization. As I mentioned earlier, we're all at risk for earthquake. That's definitely something out there. Some of us are more vulnerable to others. If you're familiar with, we can do a whole damage assessment thing. If you're in a building that has a soft first story, if there's parking underneath and you're on top, there's a good possibility they're going to have damage. So that's something to think about. So you want to look at all the things: natural disasters, the financial crisis, or even a cyber attack. That's something that's happening more and more around. People are hacking in and getting and holding your data hostage, and you have to pay a ransom to get your stuff back. So that's something you want to think about. So you want to do a thorough risk assessment for your organization. There's a lot of tips online, many resources now you can find as how to do that. But you want to do a very thorough and a very concentrated risk assessment and look at every single thing. What could go wrong? How's it going to affect us? How are we going to get through that? And then once you've identified it, you can start looking at response strategies, clear response strategies to handle that particular situation. Here's what we're going to do in case of a fire. Here's what we're going to do in case of a flood. Do we have an evacuation plan? Do we have a communications plan? Do we have a continuity of operations plan? How are we going to continue to operate under crisis situations? And then finally, so you've done your assessment, you've thought about strategies, how are you going to respond to those things? You need to start looking about roles and responsibilities. Which individual has responsibility for which role in a particular situation? It's pretty easy to say, well, the CEO is in charge of everything, but what if the CEO is not there? Do you have a succession plan? Generally, in the fire service, the first person on the scene is the incident commander. So is everybody in your organization qualified to be that incident commander if they're the first one there? And then how do they hand off to the next person? But you need the idea is to have a coordinated response. You know what might happen, you know how you're going to respond to it, and you know who's going to take the lead on that particular response. And cross training, we'll talk more about this, but cross training is a big deal too. You don't want to put all your eggs into one basket and say, okay, Bob takes care of that. Bob's going to take care of everything. What if Bob isn't there? You need to have Jill or someone else be able to do that so they can handle that particular situation. So
Yeah.
the big three: risk assessment, what bad thing can happen to me, how am I going to respond to it, and who's responsible for managing that response, and how do we do it. And it really is a team effort. Everybody needs to be involved. Everybody has a role.
The county periodically, I want to say it's every 5 years, they are required by law to create a risk assessment. It's called a hazard mitigation plan. And in that hazard mitigation plan, there is a risk assessment that's been done on a county level, and each of the cities participate in that. You might go to the county's website and look at and just type in the search hazard mitigation plan. You'll find in there that plan, and how that might impact you or how that might help you is there's maps in there that show you where there are flood zones and where there might be vulnerabilities, other ways for you to mitigate there. You'll also see there what the county's doing and how they're working through some of those hazards and what they're doing to mitigate some of those disasters.
Yeah, tons of stuff out there. You can look at liquefaction zones, for example, see what areas are most likely to have issues. Generally, the closer to the bay you are, the closer, the more likely you're going to have that. But, just take a look at all the hazards out there and get ready for them.
Yeah, for sure. So we want to talk just a little bit about ensuring that you have adequate insurance coverage. And, I'm not an insurance adjuster, so, I haven't even played one on TV ever. So, but I do think that it's important for us to take a look at and to consider the insurance coverage that you have, making sure that your office, your space, that your equipment, that your inventory is all covered under your property insurance. And then, the liability insurance, what happens if something happens and, you're sued or there's some kind of a legal claim against you as a result of whatever actions that might come out of this disaster even. And then, of course, there's business interruption insurance, making sure that there is compensation for loss of income, that your operations might be able to continue because you, or, come back after it's been halted because you have insurance that can cover that for you. So just take a look at your insurance and make sure you've got adequate coverage under those three things, especially. There,
I got a question in the chat here, Cindy. That's someone's noted that their place, not everyone's located in the same office or comes to the office or rarely comes to the office on the same days. And is it recommended that everyone have the same role and responsibilities in emergency response? And I'll start and let Cindy follow up on that. For one, not everybody, it's a good idea to have everybody at least have working knowledge of every job. Everyone may not be able to do it, in an excellent way, but it's a good idea to have everybody at least familiar with the roles, all the different roles you might have in the event of a disaster or emergency. And that's, again, a lot of resources out there. We offer classes. A great thing is the incident command system. Won't get into it now, but it's a way to manage emergencies. And that's something your staff might look into. Cindy, anything to add on that?
Yeah, that's good, Lynn. I would also say that you might not need to have every staff person trained in every position, like Lynn said, but making sure that you've got those key roles covered for 24/7. So you figured out who's going to be in charge, no matter what day, no matter what time, who's going to be the person that we're all going to look to, and if that person's gone to Tahiti, they better tell everyone who the next person in line is for that. If people are working from home, you might find, or working in scattered offices even, you might find that the disaster impact is different in different places. They may be working, like I'm not going to be affected by you all's earthquake. So I might be a key person for Cadre to be able to do communications, or to be able to be that foundation for Cadre as a nonprofit, because I don't work in the area. So you might want to take a look at that as well. If you have people that are working from home or working from out of the area, how could they then be that that person that is the anchor for the organization, or the communicator for the organization? Anybody else have other thoughts about that? Okay. Let's talk a little bit about building some financial resilience.
That's something we could all use, right?
It has some financial resilience on
Yeah.
a regular basis. Yes, exactly. Having an emergency fund, and Lynn's right, this is a personal situation as well as an organizational situation. But organizationally, it's not just having an emergency fund, but making sure that you take your supply chain into consideration. Are the supplies and the things that you need to be able to provide your services or to do your work, are they stable? Are they resilient? Have you created some redundancies? Don't you have an emergency fund, but have you stockpiled some of that inventory that you might need? Or do you have it located in another area, or in another building, or in a partner's office? That sort of thing, having that extra inventory available to you. Diversifying your funding, making sure that you have multiple funding resources or sources, that you have, that you're not dependent on that donor who may diversify their funds and send them someplace else during the disaster and put you in a little bit of a tailspin. And then, making sure that you do regular fiscal health kind of financial audits. Just looking at your financial health, I think is important to making sure that your organization is prepared for disaster, not just your day-to-day response, but as it pertains directly to a disaster.
And that's a big thing. Every once in a while you hear that story about, yeah, Flo had been the treasurer there for, like 50 years, and everybody thought she did things right. And then coming to find out she's taking vacations and has a multi-million-dollar mansion. She's funded, taking money. I mean, I'm not accusing people of stealing, but a regular audit's a good thing, because if you just trust somebody down the line, it's a great idea to have an outsider come in and take a look at that and be sure everything's up to, everything the way it should be is on the books.
Well, it's kind of like that health checkup that your insurance company asks you if you want to do periodically. Do you want to make sure that your building is insured for the proper amount of dollars? Well, the same thing holds true with this, making sure that your financial stability is intact. Then the only way you can do that is by taking a look at it.
And just one more thing on the emergency fund, and this is kind of a personal thing. Most of us, how much cash do you have in your pocket right now? Right, almost everybody uses a credit card or your ATM, right? Well, what if the ATM doesn't work? Or they can't process credit card transactions. So I'm not saying you should have a bunch of cash on hand, but a little bit of cash might be a good thing to have on hand just for emergencies.
And making, having an agreement with your vendors that you can, pay in 30 days or that sort of thing. If there's a disaster, having that kind of contingency in your contracts as well is probably a prudent way to go. probably. So let's talk a little bit about investing in technology and data security. Of course, back up your systems. Don't just back them up to, I mean, remember the old days when we used to back up to a little disk, then we had to take that to a little storage locker someplace. Now we have a cloud to back things up in, and hardly any of our actual files and records are created and stored locally. A lot of that stuff is already stored in the cloud, but make sure that you've got access to it, because there's nothing harder than trying to do something that there's no internet, or your data security company is not available, or you can't make that connection. That's so follow up with that data backup stuff. Cybersecurity, we talked a little bit about that earlier, but cybersecurity is a big one. I know I hear people complain all the time about, oh, I don't want to have two-step encryption, and I don't want to have to use my phone to get a number to plug into something to get access to this or that. But when the disaster hits, and especially if it's a cyber disaster, those kind of things are going to be really important. The fact that you had that firewall or that you had that encryption system in place is going to be important.
And we're seeing that more and more. You may have seen the stories recently about hospitals being hit. Cyber thieves coming in, locking up the system, the hospital system. They couldn't prescribe, they couldn't access patients' charts. A few months ago, the city of Oakland was attacked, and they couldn't do payroll. There were a lot of things that couldn't happen. People going to traffic court could not get, they didn't have the records. So it's a big deal. And, it tends to happen to larger organizations, but it could happen to a smaller organization like yours as well.
There used to be resistance to working from home, and then COVID hit. And I think that COVID really changed our culture in a lot of ways. And one of them is we're encouraging people to work from home more often, because it gives us that remote work capability. We have the ability to then diversify some of our technology and our data security by putting it in multiple places. But there's nothing harder than working from home when you don't have the tools to work from home, or when your VPN doesn't want to connect, or it just creates more of an issue if you haven't given your staff the tools that they need and trained them to use those tools, and given them the ability to practice using those tools day to day, so that when the disaster happens, you have a little bit of a streamlined process. You can say, everyone go to work from home mode at this point, and that's what that means. And we've all trained to that. So
and I can give you a very small example of that. When I started working with Cadre a few years ago, and I've been retired a couple of years, never worried about technology that much. And I had my home computer, and we started doing the Zoom calls regularly, and everybody else had the cool background. I'm like, hey, why can't I have the background? So Cindy was trying to talk me through it, and realized my computer wouldn't support that. I had to buy a new laptop, which Cadre was nice to buy for me, but I had to get a laptop to meet that capability. It would work on a basic way, but I didn't have all the features available. So keeping people up to date, so they have the latest features, goes along with the remote work stuff.
Yeah, and making sure that you do that considering the disaster too, because I work from home, I have a computer at home, I have the ability to do some things, but if my data systems are backed up someplace where I don't have access to them from home, I only have access to them from work, from the office, that's not going to work for me. So make sure that you get through all of those little ins and outs as well. Lynn, do you want to?
Okay, yeah. So we've talked about having a plan. We talked about being resilient, all this stuff. When you get down to the nitty gritty, you really have to train your staff and train your volunteers. Everybody needs to know what's going on. So one of the best ways, in my opinion, to start is emergency preparedness training. You need regular training on emergency preparedness, things like communications, first aid, management, things like that. Fortunately, there are a lot of resources available to do that. I would highly recommend going to FEMA.gov. There's a lot of online courses you can take. In fact, the training Cindy and I are doing today, it's FEMA Open, organizations preparing for emergency needs. That's on there. So there's a lot of training people can take. There's also local training. If you contact, depending on where you live, your city or county offers training. A great thing for employees is called CERT, Community Emergency Response Team Training. It's a class I used to teach a lot, and it gives people some very basic skills. It would be great to get your workforce into a class like that. Again, cities offer it, some counties offer it, and it does things like basic preparedness, disaster medical operations, and a lot of us had basic first aid. And disaster medical operations is what to do when the ambulance isn't coming. How do you deal with that situation? So a lot of good stuff: search and rescue, damage assessment, terrorism, a lot of good stuff out there. So take the time, take the effort, get your folks out, let them do the training. You might look at letting people go to training on work time, let them build up that extra bit of resilience. And then we've talked about this earlier, also cross training, getting people, don't have people specialize or be in their silo so they only do one thing. You want again, as I said earlier, everybody can't do everything, but it helps if they have a working knowledge. So multiple staff members are trained on the essential function that you have for each other if they need to. Everybody knows how to do CPR, everybody knows how to do certain things. So cross training is a big deal. And something to think about as we go through this is stress management. We all have stress every day, our normal day-to-day jobs. And imagine a disaster situation, how much worse it can get. So you do want to look at stress management and mental health resources during a crisis. There's something we talk about in class called the Superman syndrome, where somebody will come in, I'm in charge. I've got this. They'll work themselves to death for 18, 24 hours. And you need a system in place to say, hey, you're not going to do that. We all need to share the load, because if somebody works 24 hours straight, they're not going to be very good the next day. They're going to fall apart. So you need people to help manage, set a schedule and manage your resources, both physically and mentally, because it's a lot for people to go through. So you need to consider that as well.
And I would say to you that there are some opportunities here for you as an organization. Cadre has done specific technical assistance kind of training to help prepare agencies specifically to help them work through continuity of operations planning, or work through evacuation planning, or communications planning. Those kind of things are available. They certainly have a cost attached to them, but we can discuss them if you are interested in some kind of specific training for your agency. That cross training is so critically important, making sure that that when Jane is gone, somebody else knows how to do Jane's job, especially if she does payroll. There are critical jobs that you need to have multiple people know how to do from multiple locations in multiple ways. And then there is another opportunity with the stress management part of it. There are nonprofits, part of the Cadre Network, who specifically focus on stress management and on helping people in a disaster with things like what do they call the program where they bring the dogs, oh gosh, I can't, now my brain just went to mush. There's
the wellness dogs.
Yes, the wellness dogs,
emotional support dogs.
Well, there you go. Thank you.
Yeah.
The emotional support dogs, we have agencies that will do massage for people who are, have been sitting at a desk working hard in the middle of a disaster and, doing that Superman syndrome, just to get away for a minute and, do a little shoulder massage there. We have those kind of capabilities in our network that we can make available, and you can call on Cadre to help with those kind of things as well.
And I'll just throw out real quick also, if you go to the Cadre website and under the resources, there's a lot of stuff there. Last week or a couple weeks ago, we went through and kind of divvied up, all the staff divvied up to go through and check the links and be sure they were good. And I had, I think from A to C, and I was just amazed at how many links there are in there, how many resources there are. It points you to other websites, handouts, PDFs, just a ton of information that can really help. So I recommend hit the Cadre website and check it out. Okay, another big part is a good communication, establishing strong communications channels. And communications are pretty much the lifeblood of any organization. You have to let people know what's going on. So there's a lot of good stuff to have. So having a crisis communication plan is really where you start. So you need a plan that includes communication with your staff, with your volunteers, your clients, your donors, and the public. Think of all the audiences that you have. How are you going to communicate with them? First, how do you do it day to day? And then how do you do it under an emergency situation? Very important to train a spokesperson, have some staff ready with effective communications. I was a public information officer for many years, took a few classes, did some practice at it. And it does take practice. You don't want somebody representing an organization standing up before the camera for the very first time. They need to have had some practice and have some skills before you throw them into that situation. It's very important. And it really helps you have templates for press releases, social media updates, and stakeholder communications. If you have stuff already written, it goes a long way. Either already completely written or just having an outline or a template, insert, in case of XYZ, here's the message we want to put out, and here's how we want to put it out. So having a plan goes a long way. You need to think about a contact list, up-to-date contact list for all your key stakeholders, including, and I'd say maybe especially your vendors. How do I reach out to those people? How do we keep contact with them? And it helps to have kind of an information sharing process. Are you going to have an information center with everything going through one place? Are you going to put out recorded messages? Do you need signs for your door? All those kind of things, think about. And nowadays, of course, social media is a big thing. Years ago, you just had the networks. Now you've got social media, which is a big deal. And how to use your digital platforms to disseminate your information. Very important. You want it to look professional. You want it to look good. And again, you want to keep it secure. And remember that communication needs to be continuous. You can't set it and forget it, like they say. You have to keep putting the information out. Something I used to tell people as part of city government, it's not enough to do a good job. You need to tell people what a good job you're doing. Let them know. Keep the word flowing. That you're out there, that you're doing your thing. You're coming back. You're going to be stronger than before. But keeping that message, that information flowing to the public and your employees, and that's, I guess, you've got internal and external, but you need to be sure everybody can communicate. And there's different ways. You may think about large emergency cell phones now may not be operational. You have a backup plan. Some people are way into amateur radio. That's, it's an extreme measure, but it gives you a way to communicate. So all those different ways you can communicate, you need to consider each one and take a look at what works best for your organization.
There is nothing worse, in my opinion, than giving out bad information in a disaster that could cause the loss of life even. And making sure that the information that you are giving out is information that is true and correct, and you're not making people go into some kind of danger or in some direction that isn't the way they should be going, or
Yep.
things that they should be doing. I have during COVID, we had a city, unnamed city, who was putting out information about where people could get food, and where people could get masks, and where people could get COVID tests. And their information got a little stale, and we called them to try and help them to update their website. And what happened was their web designer had gotten COVID. And so they couldn't update the website in that particular spot. So their information was old on their website. And that was a city. That was not a nonprofit, a little nonprofit. That was a whole city, a fairly large city. So, that again kind of leads back to that cross training and making sure that it's not just one person that can stand in front of a camera. You've got multiple people that can do that. You've got multiple people that can update your web page, or that can update your media outlets, and that information is continued, and that it is fresh information every time, that you're not you're not telling people to go to a shelter that isn't there anymore.
Yeah.
Or that sort of thing.
Yeah, just a couple, just to follow up things on communications, it's not a one and done. You can't just put out a statement. Okay, we put out a statement. We're good to go now. It's continuous. You may need to think about where you need to temporarily redirect your clients. If your office isn't open, but you're still providing services, where do they need to go? How can you get the word out to them? And as Cindy mentioned, keep things update it regularly, and keep it realistic. You can't expect, hey, we're going to feed everybody, for example. We're going to feed as many as we can. Come on down while it's still here. And a big thing, make sure you have remote access. Can you get into your organization's phone system? Can you text? Can you send your social media platforms? Can somebody update that? Keep it rolling, because it's funny to me. Back in the day, if you want information, you went there or you called them, and now you get on the web. Hey, what does their website say? That's the first place people go looking for information these days. So keep that up to date. Keep it as accurate as you can.
So the other thing in question is, where will you get good information? And I will make the commitment to you that Cadre will be able to provide current information. A member of Cadre, first of all, Cadre has a duty officer, a 24/7 person on staff ready to participate in recovery or in response during a disaster, even when small things happen like a heat wave or a cold freeze or a lot of rain, those kind of things. The county creates a channel for communication, and Cadre is invited into that communication channel. And therefore we get information directly from the first responders about what's going on. PG&E participates in that. The water district participates in that. The VTA participates in that. So those organizations all do little report outs about what's happening and what's going on and what are the issues and where are they, and all of the cities participate in that as well. So, one of the cities may say, well, I've got a road blocked over here, or this is happening in my city, and there's this vulnerability, or we need to tell people to stay away from this area, or those kind of things. We'll get that information in those meetings, and then we will share that information with you all so that you have that, press release information from the county as it's going out, and you can then make your message mirror what the messages are from the first responders and from the officials. I know. I saw Lynn smirk, and
no, I'm thinking about it. I've been on a lot of those calls over these years, and it really is an alphabet soup. Every organization, from the sheriff's department to sanitation to airports and road. I mean, everybody is on those calls,
yeah.
And it's really a good resource. It takes a while to get through it, but they're managed well, and you kind of run down the list. And as Cindy said, everybody talks about what's going on in their jurisdiction. Some jurisdictions cover the entire area. You might have the weather service talking about what's coming. PG&E about when the power's coming back. So it's a really good resource, and Cadre is a good partner, I think, to our CBOs and NGOs for that kind of thing.
Okay, let's talk about fostering community and partnerships. And first of all, let's talk about about collaborating with local organizations, building relationships with other nonprofits and other businesses, especially those that are that provide the same kind of services that you might provide. That might be an opportunity if something happens to your building for you to maybe partner with another organization to get services out through their organization, or that you might be able to partner with them during a disaster if you don't have those capabilities yourself, or if your building is fine and their building is down, maybe their staff can come and help you with the provide those similar kind of services.
If I jump in there for a second, relationships are key. It's a big deal. The famous saying in emergency management, you don't want to be trading business cards for the first time at 3 a.m. when it's raining and the flood's coming.
Yeah.
If you've talked to people before and you have some relationship, it goes a long way. Instead of, in the heat of the moment, oh my gosh, who are these people? We need to deal with them. Talk to them first. That goes a long way.
Make sure that you're connected with Cadre in some way, that you're a member of the Cadre network, that you participate in one of our support networks, that you're, that you have that avenue in to get information and to share with us some of your needs, some of the resources you may have available, those kind of things, so that we can do this in a coordinated effort, and we can work together in a mutual assistance kind of way. And here's where I want to talk just a little bit about some of the support networks that Cadre is working on right now. And the biggest one, I think the one that's got the most focus right now, is our food network and our food support network. And I don't know if Luna is still on the call, but Luna, if you're still on the call, if you want to just give us a tiny overview of some of the things that you're working on for the food support network. Are you still on the call? She may not, she may have jumped off the call on. I apologize for that. But we do have some support networks that we're working on. One of them being a food support network or a feeding support network, where they're having quarterly meetings for those. And it's not just the food service providers, but it's the transportation providers and other agencies as well that are participating in that quarterly meeting. And they're talking through some of the contingency planning discussions that we've talked about today for this, just for a single organization. They're talking about it on a network kind of level as it pertains directly to food and being able to provide food to the clients day to day that those organizations serve, as well as to the community in a time of a disaster when, on a day-to-day basis, those community members may not need those services, but when a disaster strikes, they do. So we do have a food network. We have a access and functional needs network up and running right now. We're working on a faith network right now. We're working on a youth network right now, talking to schools and trying to coordinate those kind of efforts with not just schools, but with aftercare programs and that sort of thing. We're also looking at a seniors support network to coordinate some of the efforts of some of our senior centers and our senior programs. We're looking at an immigrant, and I don't know exactly what we're calling it, but an immigrant relations network of some kind, helping people who don't speak English as their first language at home to be able to communicate and to be able to know, to have information in a disaster. The county is still only putting out their emergency messages in a couple of languages. English is the emergency message is only going out in English. They are doing some written stuff in, I think, 2 or 3 other languages, but for the most part, if you speak, and there are 10,000 people in Santa Clara County who speak some dialect of African, West African dialect, they have no idea when the emergency message goes out. So, we're trying to coordinate and communicate with those networks as well, and trying to put those networks together. All of that stuff takes funding, and all of that that effort is focused today on trying to get those networks up and running and self-sufficient within themselves, so that the cost of running those networks is minimal. So what about community engagement? Keeping the community informed and involved in your activities to build trust and support. So when the disaster hits, that community engagement, making sure that, one of the things that Cadre does is when there is a big disaster, Cadre will call all of their agencies together, all of the network together, all of the nonprofits that participate in Cadre, and we'll break them into small groups. You know, the food folks can kind of talk about, this is the issue that, you know, the county may come. I'm gonna give you an example of when Coyote Creek overflowed. What was that? 2017. It was just before I retired, 16 or 17, something like that. And what Cadre did, what we did with Cadre, and I was actually working for the county at the time, what the people that were involved with Cadre at the time did was they got a big facility, a big room, and they brought all of the representatives from all the nonprofits that wanted to participate. And the county, I being the county representative, stood up and talked a little bit about some of the stuff that came out of that that call that Lynn was talking about, where all the agencies were doing their reporting. And I reported out, PG&E says this, and the water district says this is happening, and the water won't recede until here, and it's impacted these neighborhoods, and these are some of the issues, and there are mobile home parks that are flooded, and there are people who don't speak English and don't have any place to go, and there's all these things happening in our community right now. And I brought all of that to the table, and then those organizations that could help with that, you know, the people that were focused on food went to one little corner of the room and talked about how they could help with that situation. The people that didn't, that had language resources got together and talked about how they could help with that. You know, Team Rubicon and some of the construction organizations got together and talked about how they might be able to help those mobile home parks and that sort of things. So we came together as a group, and then we broke into little parts and tried to mitigate those issues, tried to respond to the issues that were brought to us as as an organization as it pertained to that particular disaster, and how could we help our community in some of those specific ways. So that community engagement is a critical part of making sure that you're resilient, but also that you're informed, and that you can help to foster that culture of continuous, of assistance and recovery, if you will. So let's talk about exercising and evaluating and improving your plan. You know, I said it just briefly at the beginning of our session today. I talked about, you know, sitting down at your staff meeting, taking 15 minutes at the end of your staff meeting, and talking about a particular type of disaster or a particular type of impact that might happen to our organization, and how we might be able to mitigate that, how we might be able to respond to that. What happens if we are without power for 3 days? What are we going to do? What happens if an earthquake happens and people can't get into the office? What happens if our clients, you know, fill in the blanks? You could come up with a whole series of simulation kind of discussions, and just take 15 minutes at each staff meeting. Take some notes about that. Add it to your plan. It would be a great thing for the camaraderie of your group, as well as keeping that disaster preparedness mindset going for your organization. Practice on other people's disasters. I love this one. You know, I love using somebody else's disaster. Right now, they're flooding and they're on fire in different places. And there's organizations that are underwater. There's organizations that are their buildings are destroyed. How are they getting through things? Find out what they're doing and use that as an opportunity to practice what you would do in a similar situation. Those are drills or simulations or regular exercises that it doesn't have to be a big formal thing where you have, objectives and all of that sort of stuff. It could be as small as a discussion periodically about how are we going to recover from this, or how are we going to respond to this. After a disaster happens, big, small, or otherwise, get your group together and talk about it. We call it a hot wash in government. We call it a hot wash. After every exercise, after every disaster, we come together and we talk about what went well, what didn't go so well, how could we make it better for next time, and we use that information to update our plan. I mean, you can talk about it all day, but if you don't update your plan and create some kind of an improvement plan as a result of it, and then follow through and do the improving, it's useless. So having that ability to update your plans, to talk through after a disaster, or even after an exercise, or after somebody else's disaster, talk through, update your plan, and then continuously improve. Set yourself some standards. Say, okay, it's 2024. By 2026, we have these things that we would like to be more prepared on. We would like to have a communication strategy. We would like to have some preset scripts that we could put out. We would like to have some signage that could go on the front of our building in case we had to be out of operations for a period of time. These are things that we can put down on an improvement plan, and we could assign to an individual or to a group or to a piece of our organization, and give them some timelines. People work better under deadlines. If I have to have a sign for the front door by the end of the month, I'm going to go get off this call right now, and I'm going to go call a sign company. I'm going to figure out what needs to be on that sign, and I'm going to start that process so that when the end of the month comes and the director of our organization turns to me in the staff meeting and says, Cindy, did you get that sign? I can stand it up and show it to him right there on the spot. That's the way we get things done. And it's that kind of follow through and that kind of continuous improvement that is going to make your organization more sustainable and more capable of getting through the disaster and being even stronger as a result of it. Part of that 75%, if you will.
And just to add on to what Cindy was saying about, regular drills, practices. My football coach many years ago said, you play like you practice. So if you put in that time and go through it, so when something does happen, it's not the first time. Oh yeah, we do drill on this. We know how to evacuate, or we know how to, set up a food truck. Whatever the skill is, the more you practice it, the easier it is. So do take that time, and you invest that time. Really is the way to look at it, and do some preparation, do some practice.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, we've gotten to the questions part of our presentation. Anybody have questions or comments or thoughts, or anybody still awake? How much responsibility is put on the building management to provide regular drills? That's a really good question, and I don't think that there is a standard, if you will. I think that if you're the one that's in that building and your organization is the one that's impacted by the disaster, you should be responsible for the drills.
Yeah, I will say most, in my experience, most larger buildings do that. I know when I worked in Mountain View, we have the 10-story building down on Castro Street, and they had a drill every year. They had an evacuation drill every year. And it's kind of interesting because they went through a process with that where, kind of to Cindy's thing, they said, we're going to have a drill at 2:00 on Tuesday. Nobody came back from lunch because they didn't want to do the drill. So then they started saying, we'll do a drill the week of, and nobody knew when it was going to happen. And they physically made everyone, set off the fire alarm. Everyone had to leave the building and reassemble down in the parking lot, to do a head count before they go back inside. So it's a great thing to practice. I would suggest, if you rent the building, I would talk to the building management and see if they're interested. And if not, I'll continue with my organization and maybe talk to the organizations around me and at least do it on my own, as opposed to waiting for them to do it. But they should be doing it. It'd be a good thing to do.
Yeah, there are some organizations like, for example, there's a little business strip in Sunnyvale where they've all gotten together and they're doing exercises together, evacuation plans together, and working together as an organization. I mean, as a group of organizations of little nonprofits as well as private sector companies. There's a little market there and that sort of stuff.
Here's another good comment in the comments here. Any thoughts on how to encourage satellite office buy-in to the process of planning? I don't want to fit push a one size fits all plan on a place with 6 people and no clergy, and a place with 600 congregants and 5 clergy. That's very different. So
Sure.
I'll start and let Cindy follow up on it. Again, getting people to buy in, it's all a process of making that a priority of your organization. Everyone should understand from the beginning that we're all in this together. Even if you're in the small satellite place, you need to be part of the plan. You need to get with the system, and management needs to make that clear, and workers, staff needs to buy into that as well. And you're absolutely right. You can't have one size fits all. Obviously, if you have 5 or 6 people, it's very different than 500 or 600 people, and the number of people you have. So you have to customize your plans for each of those areas. But again, it's got to be a core value of the organization to have everybody buy into being prepared.
Yeah, and I'll take one step further and say that a few years ago we worked with one of the cities on continuity of operations planning, and that city decided that they didn't want to write one plan, that they wanted each of their departments to have a separate plan or a different plan. And then they wanted those plans to be coordinated with each other. So you may have a situation where you've got a small office with only 6 people in it or that sort of thing. And they, you may need for them to work with another small office and, do some contingency planning around facilities and those kind of things. So there is there's a way to do that. It takes a little bit of effort, but I would say the number one thing is you've got to have buy-in by your upper echelon. If you don't have buy-in by your superiors or by the people at the top, it's very difficult to get things done. But if you do have that kind of buy-in, things can roll pretty quickly. It's something that Lynn and I have spent years and years beating our heads against a wall about, because some cities are more willing to take a look at this than others. A lot of times there are management will say things like, we've only got so much budget and so many hours and so much staff, and we have a lot of other priorities. This one is not one that we're willing to take the risk because this one is not one that's necessarily going to happen as often or whatever. But when the disaster hits, they're all going to be looking to the person that was wanting to be prepared. There's a really good book that was written by Amanda Ripley. The name of the book is oh gosh. I'm so sorry. I can't think of the name of the book right this second. The name of the book is When Crisis Strikes. I don't remember. I'm sorry. Anyway, that book has a lot of really good information about what happens in a disaster and what people do during a disaster. And I'm trying to come up with it. I'm sorry. There are resources out there that can help you. I guess that's the point I'm trying to make, is that there are resources out there that can help you. Did I just make our screens silly. Can
Move
you,
back to the start, the beginning slide, yeah.
I'm at the beginning slide. Okay, so I'm just gonna scroll through these real quick. I'm sorry. I was gonna go see if I could find the name of that book and ended up messing up other things, and I apologize for that. Someone got something in the chat. Lynn, you wanna address that?
Just someone mentioned that they had formerly worked at a place where they get random drills every 3 months, but the current space only the alarm goes off, but there's no escape plan drills. So again, I would say I would take it upon myself for my organization at least to go ahead and do those drills. It just doesn't hurt to have everybody get the muscle memory of what to do and how to do it. You know, when you hear the alarm, you get up, you go outside and count heads before you go back inside. Or in an earthquake, you duck, cover, hold. You know, do those things just annually. Just make it a habit, and it'll roll from there.
And with that, I would just ask you to take a look at our website. Like we've said, there are lots and lots of, there's lots of information on the website. Look at under preparedness, look under response and relief. Just go and look at the plethora of information that's on our website. There is a cute little donate button if you're interested in making a donation to Cadre while you're there. You're also welcome to participate in the Cadre network. That QR code that's on your screen right now will get you to the application to participate as a member of Cadre. It's free and it really just helps us figure out who to send information out to and how to do that and how to coordinate some of those efforts that we're talking about with those support networks.
So with that, I think we give you the gift of about 25 minutes of your time back.
The gift of time.
Unless you have other comments or thoughts or questions or that sort of thing. We're certainly open to that.
And thank you for attending. Appreciate you coming out.